thank you, Poorna, for joining me. I'm super excited. So really appreciate you being here and talking to me about this insanely important subject about women's physical strength. And I'm doing a brief introduction and then go straight into it. That's okay. So Poorna Bell is an award-winning author and journalist who previously worked as UK executive editor and global lifestyle head for HuffPost. She also is a digital editorial consultant, has a weekly column in the I paper and freelances for the Times, Telegraph, Red, and Stylist, among lots of others. And Stronger, Changing Everything I Knew About Women's Strength is her third book. And, we have to explain that you are now a competitive amateur powerlifter who can lift twice your own body weight, which is insane. And you are obviously perfectly placed to start a very important conversation about women's strength and fitness, one that has nothing to do with weight loss, which is so important. So, I have to ask, because obviously, the book starts off with your own health. And so I'm just wondering, how are you managing your physical and mental health these days?
Yeah, I think it's the understanding that it's an ongoing process, and thank you for that lovely intro as well. But definitely when it comes to health, there are two particular periods in my life that I chart in the book, which is one was being diagnosed with a congenital heart disorder, which ended up getting fixed because it was a hole in the heart, and the second was having long COVID, which are the longer term effects of having had COVID for about 10 months. And I'm now recovered from that and have been since the beginning of, January 2021. But I think what both of those things have taught me, and it's obviously woven through the backbone of the book, is that everyone will go through different things in terms of their health. And even if you are in good health, as I, touch wood, currently am at the moment, that there will be other times during the course of my life where I will have to confront that point again of dealing with, health issues and how you rebuild and how you recover from that. So I think that at the end of what has been about 18 months of a lot of physical and mental recovery, just generally, and I cannot stress how frustrating is the wrong word, but I think also just very disorientating it is dealing with a health condition that the health professionals know absolutely nothing about while you're going through a pandemic. I mean, that was a wheeze. But sort of, having come out at the end of that, I would say that from a mental health point of view or a mental well-being point of view, it has definitely reinforced certain things for me in terms of how it's important to consistently protect and look after your mental well-being, whatever shape or form that takes. But also from a physical point of view, that it's not about quantity or volume or, distances or weights that you can lift or anything like that. Actually, it's very much the context of that will change for you during the course of your lifetime many different times. So that's the approach I'm taking, which is just learning how to adapt and be flexible, but also understanding that whenever there is anything going on with me physically, mentally, there has to be a piece that runs alongside that as well.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think it's what you started off the book with, which was I thought was so important, was how we kind of come to physical activity, isn't it, as children? And I was just wondering, like, how did like PE, physical education at school, make you feel about your own body, and what do you think should change? Because I had terrible, like, I was awful at PE, and I would keep getting notes from like my mum or fake notes to avoid it as much as possible. So.
Yeah, I mean, some of us forged our notes, so you at least went through the proper channels. But that the chapters at the beginning, which focus on PE and how you're taught about sport and movement, and really that's, to be honest, the first lesson that you're going to have around your body. It is a chapter that has resonated the most, I would say, with people who have read the book. And for me, PE generally was a bad experience at school because I didn't really understand how I went from someone who really loved running around and playing with my friends in my local neighborhood, and I didn't understand how that then got siphoned into a stream of different activities that I just hated, that I was just terrible at, and the teachers didn't seem to really want to take their time to explain things to you or to just show you how to do it properly. And I think that what ended up happening, as is the case for a lot of people, is that when you aren't taught certain things, you fill that narrative anyway. You fill it with the things that, because I think people think, oh, well, but you weren't, your self-esteem wasn't negatively impacted in the sense that you didn't have people saying horrible comments to you. And obviously there are people who have had horrible comments said to them, which is even worse. But I said, yeah, but in lieu of being told, how to harness your body, how to appreciate it, how to have gratitude for it, you fill it with something else, which is, if the messaging is that you're not very good at something, you're taught that that's your fault, that you're not very good at something. And when it comes to things like physicality, whether there are children, for example, who may have hidden or visible disabilities, they're marginalized even further from that conversation. And it's very much that the people who managed to push past that were people who were lucky enough to have families who were active anyway. But there are a huge number of girls and people who just fall through those gaps because of how physical activity and sport is taught. And very often, actually, what we found was that, and there's data to back this up, is that if you are an adult who enjoys some form of physical activity, very often it doesn't look anything like what you were taught at school. In fact, actually, people very vehemently move away from the type of activities that they did at school. And that to me is a big problem, because if so many of us are feeling like this, if that is still the case, then how we are taught about that kind of stuff when we're younger has a dual purpose, in which it doesn't make us feel very connected to our bodies. It doesn't fill us with a lot of confidence or love around our bodies. But also it's stuff that we then take into adulthood, in for some people in very damaging ways.
Yeah, totally. And I think did you go to a girls' school as well? It sounded like you said you did, isn't it? I went to a girls' school too. And I found like we never ever learned any defensive sports, which I found really annoying. Like, I was like, I really liked football and I wanted to do more, say, martial arts and stuff, but they didn't ever sort of teach you anything like that. And I was thinking, like, what do you think the consequences are of believing fitness is only for like weight loss? And what does it mean for you? What do you think?
I mean, the consequences are enormous. It's probably one of the biggest motivators for me of why I speak out about this stuff, because I've just seen how damaging it can be, and also just how incorrect it is. And I just think that it's a real shame that we forget that there was a time when we moved our bodies in a way that felt absolutely freeing and joyous, and we lose that. And it's not because and we tell ourselves that we lose it because we're unmotivated or we're lazy, and neither of those things are true. It's just that we're then told that we have to move our bodies in certain ways to attain weight loss, which isn't fun. The motivation often feels like punishment. It can be quite restrictive, and there's nothing joyous about it. And that is a big problem. I think that when I ran a survey to do with Stronger, because I needed a broader sense of what the lay of the land was like, and what the experiences and emotional connotations were for women when it came to physical activity. And I was absolutely shocked about the prevalence of disordered eating and eating disorders, and how that had affected so many people in a sense where it had just been hidden for most of their lives, or they had just lived alongside it. And I just don't think it sets you up for a very good future. If you're told that the primary function of physical activity is weight loss, which is incorrect, by the way, because there are lots of reasons why you might want to move your body, and again, the joyousness of it, but you also might have, let's say, performance goals, as I do with my own type of training, is that it completely overlooks other health aspects. So things, for example, like your bone density, 80% of people who have osteoporosis, which is where your bones have holes in them and they're very fragile and brittle, are women.
Yeah.
When you go through different physiological, biological changes like the menopause, there are very real impacts that will happen on your body as a result of your hormones, which if you've only ever moved your body for weight loss purposes, or if you've restricted your diet in any way, it completely negates eating food because it's nutritionally good for other aspects of your health, and that to me is a really big problem, because also if at the same time we're only being role model fitness using people who are in their 20s and early 30s, where is the roadmap for when you get older, for when actually moving your body is even more important? And that to me was deeply, deeply concerning, because there are no good reasons around any of that other than this underpinning of toxic diet culture, which tries to suppress us, tries to make us as small as possible, and completely drowns out the fact that actually all of this stuff is about giving us our best chance, making us healthy, versus an aesthetic. And aesthetics can be important to people. I'm not saying that they can't be. I'm just saying that aesthetics are irrelevant if you don't have your health to go alongside it.
Yeah, totally. And that's what makes me so mad, because actually I'm actually a mentor at the Beat Eating Disorder charity, and I used to dance as a child, so I did Indian classical dancing, and I was a heavier child. And actually, it served me really well to be heavier, because doing those really very extremely complicated spins, you needed a lot of energy. And when I was much older and I'd already gone through a big period of disordered eating, I couldn't do it anymore. I was just so weak that I would just get dizzy all the time. And so it makes me really mad that we are taught this, because, it means that I can't dance in the same way anymore as a result of that. And I was just wondering, for you, what was the moment you realized your body was like capable of much more than before?
It definitely was when I started powerlifting. So powerlifting is a competitive type of weightlifting, which I started in at the end of 2018. And I had a 2-year break for a number of reasons due to COVID and just not being well last year. But that was the step change for me. I'm lucky in the sense that I would say that I've never had an eating disorder. I've just had periods where you convince yourself that you have to give up sugar, you have to do this, that, and the other. Oh, I shouldn't really eat carbs, all of that stuff. Um, but I would say that when I came to powerlifting, what I think I was really nervous about was being told that I had to eat more in order to build muscle and fuel my training sessions. And that felt like a very uncomfortable place to be in, because that went against everything that I'd been told I should do before and around physical activity and so on. But what I realized very quickly, I thought I was obviously smarter than my coach, and decided to do it my own way, which many of us have realized is really not going to set you up for success. So, but what I found was when I tried to, do the same things that I did before, which effectively is trying to do exercise on as little as possible, right?
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it. I couldn't go into a training session and lift the weights that I needed to lift. And the disappointment and the upset that I felt about not being able to do that, and realizing that the thing that was standing in my way was not eating enough food, or being so scared about eating, more food. That for me was, I think, a sort of shackles falling from your eyes moment, because I just realized how insane it was to prevent myself from getting physically stronger, which was only something that made me feel good about myself, that actually made me more capable. And I was holding on to this, this diet culture thing that had never really actually given me a sense of achievement around anything. So that for me was the moment that I saw firsthand the impact of eating enough food in order to like literally do your workout, your training session, right? And that sounds like such a simple thing, but it was a very important connection for me to make, because I think that we're told so much rhetoric that gets in the way of that. But the other thing was also having to confront you know, my own internalized fat phobia of, okay, so what why does it matter? Like, why does it matter if I get bigger? Like, why is that the thing to be afraid of? And that was something that I think I really had to come to terms with. And also just in terms of just learning a lot about, you know, the sort of the morality that we put on body sizes and health and so on. And one of the things that I definitely was very happy to unpack in the book was just this notion that we think we know what someone's health is by looking at their body size, and we just don't. Or, you know, if you see someone, I mean, I still see this so being posted so much on Instagram, you know, if you see someone who's plus size in the gym, the amount of like flack that they end up taking because people just assume that they're not as experienced, whereas, you know, they've been going for years, or they're a very experienced weightlifter or whatever it might be. And so that takes a lot of unlearning, I think. But I think fundamentally that journey has to begin with yourself and asking yourself why these things are important to you, and where is it being perpetuated? Is it being perpetuated by certain friends, family members, accounts that you follow on social media? And if it is, then I would just personally, it's taken a while. I mean, I'm saying it like it's really easy, but I would shut it down. I mean, it's taken me years, but I say to family members, I just say, I don't want to talk about this, and it's not what my fluctuations in my body size is not really up for discussion. And I don't also want to talk about your diets either.
Yeah, it's so hard, you know, because yeah, I'm like, I know you mentioned it, because in the South Asian society is pretty terrible in terms of when people telling you what size you should be and things like that. And there was a lot of fat shaming, especially, yeah, I was sort of brought up in that fat shaming, and I was a much larger child, and I was very happy with myself. That's the thing. I never noticed it. I was just happy. And only when other people brought it up, it started really sort of setting into my mindset. And so, how do we stop this from like perpetuating, get more women into fitness? Because otherwise, we're not going to have any South Asian women doing this stuff.
I mean, the one thing I would say that has really cheered me up in the last year is that I've seen this real explosion of South Asian fitness, whether it's trainers, whether it's influencers on social media, at a rate that I haven't really seen before. And I think that and I mean, okay, it's a personal interest of mine, but definitely, you know, South Asians who powerlift and lift really heavy weights is something that women especially, is something that I've just been overjoyed to see. The issue is that this is where you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, um, we we come from a culture where you can't win either way, because we come from a culture where food is such a central part of how we
Yep.
connect as family members, how we celebrate, how we gather together, right? And also the idea of, you know, feeding, you know, your aunts or your you know, parents, whatever, pushing food on you. And then at the other end of that delightful spectrum, you've got the comments that come as a consequence of that. So on the one hand, you sort of feel like a hamster just going for an electrified pellet. You know, on the one hand, you're encouraged to eat.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you're completely like, you know, criticized for whatever might be going on with your body.
Yep.
And I think where I realized that you just can't win with this situation is when I was much younger. You know, we're talking about sort of 20 years ago, where I would have been possibly a size 6, maybe a size 8 at the most. And I would get comments from, you know, from people in my community every time I saw them of, you know, what they thought was happening with my body, whether or not I'd put on weight or not. And now when I look back at that, you know, I'm just like, what were you talking about? And then I realized that it doesn't matter what my body size is. they were always going to comment on it because that's just the type of society that we have. What I would just say is there is your own sanity to protect very, very ferociously within that, because unfortunately, no one else is going to do that for you, right? You might be able to have allies, like you might have siblings or friends within that, but you are going to have to be the person that protects this and has to do it for yourself. At the same time, where the potential and where the room for growth is either your peers. So basically, when you hear people talking about, you know, food and talk about food in quite a problematic way, or in, you know, we talk about diet culture language such as, oh, I'm being really naughty while reaching for a cake or whatever. And I'm a bit of a loudmouth, as some people might have guessed. So I will probably, I have said stuff in the past of just like, you know, just stop beating yourself up about it, just have it if you want it. But the thing is also it's the younger generation that comes up behind us, and that's where I think is the biggest potential. And that is not just about empowering them, it's also about minding what we say about food and how we talk about our bodies around them. So I would love to say that things are changing quickly, but for many people, they may not be changing quickly enough. So I would just say that actually that's why that protection of yourself, and also hanging out with like-minded individuals who will support and promote your healing and your growth and your journey and whatnot, is really, really important, which is why for example, belonging to a team and a community of powerlifters is really important, because I will never have to, there are things that will never come up in conversation, you know, that I will have to then deal with in terms of my extended family and friends. And that is honestly such a relief and a respite from not having to just have those same problematic conversations over again.
Definitely. And you were mentioning, which I thought is so cool, to have so much more like South Asians actually doing powerlifting, which is such a huge thing. And I was just wondering, how was it for you, like when you did it for the first time? What was like the feeling you had when you like were able to start lifting the really heavy weights?
I think it's just it changes how people see you, I think, in a really, I mean, that can be in a good and bad way, you know, in that it makes you feel, well, it made me feel anyway, very capable, very confident. And just, it was like this thing that just sits underneath your skin, where you just you draw an enormous amount of strength and reassurance and safety from it. That's the only way I can really describe it. It ends up being something that, you know, particularly with men, I will have conversations with in a way that I never would have had conversations with them about training before. And there's weirdly a level of respect that you kind of get, especially from them, which I'm not saying you need that validation, but that was something I noticed, and I remember being surprised by it. I found that it just opened more doors for me in terms of you know, moving beyond things that felt quite gendered into actually being able to have discussions with anyone about it. And actually it's something that ends up being a conversation point in a really positive way. I mean, at the beginning, my parents were really worried, and a couple of friends. I think they were just like, what is this thing that you're doing? And you're just going to injure yourself. And I just said respectfully, you can do that picking up something heavy from the boot of your car. So as long as I'm doing it, you know, in a sustained, healthy way, just be happy for me that I'm doing something that I really enjoy. And they don't really say it so much anymore. I know they know that I've signed up to a competition which will be taking place in a couple of months, but you know, they haven't said, oh, make sure you be careful or whatever. So I
That's a
take that
good
as a
sign.
win.
Yeah, that's a good sign, isn't it? They're moving on finally. And but you know, I'm like, it's amazing that you know, you've already gone through your own sort of physical health challenges. And I was just wondering, how were you able to kind of adapt yourself after, you know, going through all those different changes?
I think in terms of adapting, for me, I think the biggest thing was understanding that there was a mental well-being piece alongside of it, so that understanding what your values are and what your strengths are that have nothing to do with physicality, I think was a really, really important part of how you navigate your way through certain health conditions. Because I think that very often, even if it's not a health condition, even if it's, just a seismic change to your body, for example, like having children.
Yeah.
I don't have children, but I've spoken to and heard from enough people in terms of where the problem seems to be are the expectations that we put on ourselves in terms of recovery from something, right? And actually, and I think that does apply to when you're recovering from illness, or when you just maybe don't have a specific timeline that you can work to. It's about looking at what is, how do you shrink that timeline down? So is it that it needs to be shrunk down to maybe a week? Is a week manageable, or does it need to be longer term than that? And what suits where you are right now. But it's also the expectations and working in flexibility around those expectations, rather than them being such fixed points. But also, and this is where I sort of refer to the kind of the mental well-being part of it. It's the understanding that if your body doesn't meet the goals and expectations that you have for it, it's about how you recover from that sense or that feeling of that it's failed you, because it hasn't failed you. It's a machine that works in a particular way that just might need a bit of tinkering with, or needs a bit of rest and recovery, and so on. Like it's like its entire purpose is to keep you alive and to keep you healthy as much as it can. It doesn't kind of exist to disappoint you. So I think that because I know from my own experience, I've been very very hard on it, I think. Very dismissive, and yeah, I would say harsh is the word that I would use, when actually it just needs a bit of time and empathy and a sense of perspective around, okay, it can't do this thing that I want it to do, but what else can it do? And I think retaining that gratitude for it, and the hope that at some point it might recover is really important. But also talking to people who are going through similar experiences to you can be really helpful. I mean, sometimes it's not very helpful, and it can be quite triggering. And if other people are in a worse place than you, it can make you feel like you're going backwards. But sometimes talking to people who've recovered, I would say specifically, can help, because it just gives you a sense that maybe things might change.
Yeah, no, definitely. And this is the weird thing, is that like obviously our body's changing is just inevitable. It's just going to happen, isn't it? But we seem to always hold on to the idea that, first of all, we're never going to die. And the other aspect is obviously we're always going to be young. So why do we do that?
I think I mean, we live in a massively ageist society. So I think that being able to connect to our older age is just something that we've been taught to fear. And most people don't really want to confront something that they fear. But actually, if you learn a bit more, if you follow different accounts of people that aren't necessarily just in your own age demographic and younger, you kind of see that actually there are lots of older people who are doing lots of incredible things, whether that's being amateur athletes, whether that's just the different kind of careers that they do, the fashion that they wear, and so on. And I think that for me, that's one of the biggest joys of social media, is having access to all of these amazing people that show me that getting older is not something to be afraid of. And also that these ideas that we have of milestones and where we should be at every age and what we should look like is absolute nonsense, because
Yeah.
no one else gets to set that for ourselves apart from ourselves. And so we have to really consider, well, okay, what influences that then? And am I surrounding myself with the best possible influences, and do I understand the choices? Because if all we're doing is surrounding ourselves with the same people who lead the same lifestyle, it's not really a choice. I think we're just kind of deferring to the default and doing what we think everyone else expects of us, or what our parents did before us, and so on. So personally, I think that that's a very important part of being able to connect to our older selves. And also it's that piece that I said earlier, which is, you know, understanding that our older selves, we want our older selves to be as healthy and as capable as possible. And so we can do something about that, you know, in the decades before we get to that point. And that's an important thing to do, I think. The we will never die thing, I mean, I was talking to a friend about this recently, actually, and that whole thing of thinking that we're completely invincible. Personally, I think that the majority of people who might think like that may have never actually experienced, you know, deep tragedy or trauma, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And I'm not saying that you have to experience trauma to understand that, but I would say that that tends to be the mindset of people who haven't been shaken out of that, you know, that bubble yet. But also, you know, maybe that's not something you need to contend with right now. I mean, the only inevitability that we have is that at some point we will be forced to contend with our mortality. So why hasten that any sooner than you have to? And as long as you're just looking after yourself and, you know, not kind of self-sabotaging your own health and your own mental well-being around that, then maybe it's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you're right about curating content, the stuff that you see online, isn't it? It's such a massive issue, like especially in terms of diet culture and the fact that you only see a certain type of person on those kind of users online. And so I was just wondering, how do we stop social media from feeding into negative self-esteem?
Interesting you asked this, because I was feeling very negative about my self-esteem in the last few days. And I noticed that a lot of it comes through Instagram, not TikTok. Like, I find TikTok hilarious and it always makes me laugh. But Instagram and it is probably the main one. And I was thinking, okay, well, you know, why is this making me feel like that? And the main reason for it is because I'm following, for example, at the moment, a lot of people who I perceive to be really busy, doing amazing things. And there's a gap between where I perceive I am and where I perceive that they are, right? And even though I know that what I'm looking at is not the whole story, that I'm literally seeing, because we only post stuff on Instagram when we're actually doing something. So of course naturally it creates this impression that people are busy and they've got lots of stuff going on. But what I just realized, I was kind of scrolling through this content just really grumpy, and I was just like, okay, Poorna, but you're not, you know, you're not powerless within this. Just mute them for now, and then when you're in a better place mentally, you can unmute them. And I don't know why I forgot that the mute button was a thing, but it's almost like this negative addictive thing you get sucked into, where you see it, kind of have this thought where you're like just, you know, grumbling about it, and then you just kind of keep going, and then you take that like negativity away from you even when you shut down the app. So I think being able to mindfully catch that, don't follow accounts that make you feel bad about yourself. I mean, if there is an account that doesn't make you feel particularly great, that makes you feel inadequate, etc., unfollow them or mute them. You really, there's no one who's going to hold you to account, and if anyone does hold you to account, then they're weird and you shouldn't be following them anyway.
Yeah, do you know what? I blame this on being journalists. Honestly, I think we get sucked into lots of negative news stories because part of us are thrilled by it, which is slightly kind of schadenfreude. So it's difficult to switch off from really bad news. It's bad.
Yeah, I mean, having said that though, I think when I noticed that my mental health was not in the greatest place at the beginning of this year of 2021, I actually just stopped checking the news. So and it's served me really, really well. When I say that, obviously there are times when I do check the news and where I might need to for my job and so on. But generally, unless I have to, I don't check the news if I really don't have to. And I think also when I've been lucky enough to have a couple of periods out of the year that weren't based, for example, in the UK. And being outside of, let's say, a London bubble, for me specifically, I realized how much of the stuff I see on Instagram is this sort of perfect storm situation where everyone keeps sharing the same thing, and it just fuels, and it just completely just whips up this kind of frenzy amongst people that I know. And I just thought, I can get space and time from that when I'm not in the UK. I don't feel like I can get space and time when I'm actually obviously based in the UK.
Totally.
That's when I need to mute. Yeah.
Totally. God, yeah, I totally agree. As soon as you get out of it, then you realize actually the world doesn't exist in this bubble, which is really difficult to get out of sometimes. And actually, I think you mentioned this a lot because obviously, this book is a follow-on from, Chase the Rainbow, and I was just wondering, like, how connected do you think our bodies are to grief and trauma?
I think that it depends on where you are and how you process your grief. I think that for me, my body remembers things. I think that you hold it in certain parts of your body, and I think that it especially if you're feeling something that's really intense, the way that I know that it's held within my body is when you kind of like take your hand and you hold it over your heart, and it really sort of anchors you to that emotion that's kind of that's buried there. We store trauma in our bodies. Someone said something like, oh, the body doesn't remember, and I'm like, yeah, of course it does. It absolutely does.
Yeah.
But I would just say that when that kind of stuff happens, I move my body in a completely different way than I normally would. So for example, rather than going to a gym and being around people, what I need to do at that point is go for a slow walk, and I need to be somewhere like a park or wherever it is where I'm just not around very many people, because the emotion just feels so intense and so vast that it kind of needs to be let go of. And definitely waterways. So anything like a river, a really large lake, or the sea is incredible for that kind of stuff. It just sort of cools and calms everything down, I think.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I think they've always said that water is some kind of significance in your dreams as well, isn't it? It's like deep well of emotion. So it makes sense that, water's supposed to be quite soothing. And, like for people with sort of mental health and physical health conditions, like, I live with both conditions, and I was just wondering, what's your best advice to kind of keep active, especially when you're like going through both like periods of depression and you just don't want to get up and get out?
I think it can be really, I mean, giving advice around that is quite difficult, because obviously it really depends on where you're at and where you're feeling and so on. But there are fluctuations sometimes. So sometimes there just might be days when, leaving the house or leaving bed is just not really an option. But there might be days when possibly you feel like you might be able to do it. And I would say on the days when that happens, it's again about that thing of having the flexibility and adaptability to really shrink down everything to something that feels manageable, that feels within reach. So rather than it being, a big gym session or a long walk or whatever, could it be a 10-minute walk? Like, literally a walk around the block? Could that be the thing that we can do today? And it's also about building in, almost like a kind of a safety catch within that, of if, for example, there's a day that you think, okay, I'm gonna go to the gym, or I'm gonna, commit to whatever this thing is that I've decided to do, to just kind of give yourself the permission to say to yourself, you know what, if we get there, or if we start doing it, we're going to give it maybe 10-15 minutes, and if we're really not feeling it, then we're going to come home. And I think that can be, it's about operating within a sense of compassion for yourself and looking after yourself, rather than just pushing on through something, just because you feel like, oh, if I do this, then this will prove to me that I am well, or, I'm not as ill as I thought I was. And I would be mindful of those narratives that we tell ourselves. At certain points in time, you can only, do the best with what's in front of you, and that doesn't make it the 10-minute walk doesn't make it any less of an achievement than going for an hour's run or whatever that is, because you're doing the best with what you are able to do on that particular day, right? So I would just say that it's also about being very, very intuitive with your movements. You know, I was having a conversation with someone online the other day about running, and they were saying about how they hate running, but you know, so any tips on how to motivate yourself to go running? It's like, dude, don't run. Like if the words that precede any activity of I hate doing this, how do I motivate myself? The answer is within that question, don't do it, because you should never have to motivate yourself to do something that you hate doing.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have days when, you know, we're feeling unmotivated, or I'm just like, oh, I really don't want to have to go out of my house. I don't have to do this or whatever. And then you just know if you did leave, you would feel a bit better. But I feel like you intuitively know the difference between that and I physically cannot leave my house or do this. And I would just say with the intuitive, you know, there are some amazing accounts on Instagram around intuitive movement and fitness. And Tally is always, you know, she's got an account that I think is great for pointing out how you can intuitively move your body. But I would just say it's about finding something that may be completely left field, that might be something you've never really tried before, but it just kind of suits where you particularly are at this point in time. And maybe mentally being in a gym is the worst place that you can be, and actually, I don't know, going for a swim in a lake outdoors or going for a cycle ride or something is preferable. It's different to that, because maybe you don't really want to be around people, and that's okay. That's fine too. That's just where you're meeting yourself where you're at mentally.
And it's great that you mentioned that, because you were talking about mindfulness and intuitiveness, and there was this the idea of mindful eating and intuitive eating, and I was just wondering, how do we stop being preoccupied by diet culture and think more about actually fitness for health?
In terms of not looking at fitness as something that's just a vehicle for weight loss or to diet or to lose weight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So so I would say that just means a reframing of what you think fitness is. And I don't know that many people ask themselves what they think fitness is, because I ended up having a very elongated chat with a friend about this, and I tried to get her to tell me what she thought it was, but it kept coming back to the weight loss piece every single time. And I just said, weight loss can be a component sometimes. Sometimes it can be a component of fitness, but fitness is not weight loss, and weight loss is not fitness, right? They're not like interchangeable things. When we look at things like fitness, it includes a lot of different components. And a really good account to follow on Instagram is a guy called Syat Fitness. Syat is spelled SYATT. And something like fitness can comprise of things like performance. So for example, you know, how far you can run, how many laps you can do, or in this pool or whatever it is. And it also can have aesthetics as part of that. But it also could include other things, for example, like endurance and stamina. Enjoyment is one of those things as well. The reason why I say to people, what does fitness actually mean to you, is I don't know that very many people think about it in those terms. And I think that that's because we've had the messaging that, you know, it's about weight loss and so on. And I think that reframing that is really important, because there are times when your body will need to move intuitively, because you're just not well enough to be able to, for example, do a really intense training program or a goal, you know, performance-based goal or whatever it is. And that will always be a skill set that will be open and available to you. And the more that you can hone that, the more you can, it's about like regaining that trust in your body. You know, a lot of people get really freaked out, and I got really freaked out about the concept of mindful eating and, you know, intuitive fitness and so on, because I had just completely lost faith in my body to be able to tell me what it needed at that point in time. But the more of that kind of stuff that you can practice when you then need to draw on it later on in life, when you might not be at your full physical peak, that is a very, very good tool, I think, to have in your arsenal. And the final point I would say on this, because I was trying to remember it and I forgot, which was, for example, with fitness, you know, people also think that the goal of fitness is to basically be completely fatigued and to sweat. And if you're not fatigued, you know, if you're not out of breath, if you're not sweating, then it means that you haven't trained hard enough. And that is just, I'm sorry, but that is just not true. Depends on what you want your training to do. What is the purpose of it? But you don't, you know, I hate cardio. I absolutely hate doing cardio. It sucks. If I could, you know, live the rest of my days without doing a single burpee again, I would consider that to be an achievement. And I don't need cardio to be to have a healthy heart. So, you know, there's a distinction between things like cardiovascular fitness and cardiovascular health. I will do the things that will make me cardiovascularly healthy. I don't need fitness because I'm not planning to run a marathon. So I think like finding out a bit more about this, like following Instagram accounts actually can like educate a little bit about that. I think can be very helpful.
No, that's really interesting. And actually, this is so key, which is looking at See My Strong, which was your amazing Instagram account with all these amazing people showing their skills, actually, that anything is possible. And I think this has been really problematic because there's not much representation or role models out there. So what do you think the impact is when you don't have those people and you can't see them?
The impact is huge. I mean, if you look at statistics of various communities, so for example, the South Asian community in the UK, South Asian women are the least active demographic. It's not because we don't want to move, it's because we just literally have no role models. Out in the fitness industry, in the mainstream, I mean, I don't remember ever seeing a South Asian fitness person on the cover of Women's Health. I don't remember seeing them previously. I mean, it's getting a lot better, but as you know, the faces of campaigns for major sports brands. In our own communities, we prioritize academic achievement over physical or sporting achievement. So it's a double bind, right? When you then consider, for example, other communities like the Black community, where you have myths, for example, that are pervasive around, for example, swimming, you know, those have real life impacts in terms of Black children, for example, being 3 times more likely to drown. And so these things are, you know, they're not a nice to have. Like these have serious health outcomes. The people at the sharpest end of that stick will usually be people of color. And what I would say to that is, you know, it is very important to have representation, not only because of uptake, so not only to encourage people from certain communities to take that up, but also in terms of role modeling safe, you know, why it's important, how it can change lives, but also providing safe spaces. You know, very often there are, for example, in rugby, Zainab Lima, who is this amazing rugby player. Yeah, she spoke about, you know, having to go to rugby matches that would often be in the middle of nowhere, and she turns up, you know, a Black woman wearing a hijab, feeling very, very uncomfortable about whether or not she was going to be okay in those areas. And that, you know, that is not okay because, you know, no pun intended, we're not on an even playing field when it comes to that stuff, especially if we're looking at things like accessibility. So there are groups that have opened up, that have sprung up. Zainab started her own, you know, group to help empower other women like her. And those groups are, yeah, those groups are springing up and they're great. But I definitely want to see more integration into the mainstream. And I want like mainstream organizations showing us how things are changing. And hopefully it is changing, but slowly.
Yeah, God, I always thought that after Bend It Like Beckham, there'd definitely be more South Asian women footballers, but obviously not. It didn't do enough to inspire, sadly. So, yeah, I was quite surprised to hear that, and that there are just no South Asian footballers at all, like South Asian female footballers. So I was like, oh dear Lord. And actually, and the other issue, I think these are the two areas you also covered, which I thought was really important, which was period health. And you know, there's so much stigma across the world around periods. And you know, why do you think there's just like, you know, just a lack of education around it? Because I was so shocked to to hear that actually there's so much you could actually think about in terms of your own period, and what is your optimum time and things like that. I had no idea. I was just like, what?
Yeah, I mean that is a big learning, I think, for a lot of people. I only learned about that, I would say, in the last 2 years, and I was absolutely shocked
Yeah,
that
I
it
read it
had
from your
taken.
book. I was like, what?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's a big problem, because that is such a fundamental thing to be taught about how something that affects your body will have impacts in terms of like things like injury, moving your body, why you might feel more hungry, at particular points in time, and so on. I mean, the only reason I can think of it is that we live in a hugely sexist society, and I don't think that periods affect, for example, in the UK, 51% of the population, not including non-binary people as well. But I just think that it's something that hasn't been seen as a priority, and there
Mm,
has historically been a huge taboo around all of this stuff. I mean, unfortunately, I can't answer the question because it's too big, and it's for the same reason of paying tax on tampons and things like that. It's
yeah.
just gender inequality, and that is a structure of the world that we live in. But what I would say is that as more and more people talk about this stuff, we understand the importance of period tracker apps and all of that kind of stuff, because it just informs you about what's going on with your body.
Yeah.
It removes that sense of shame that you might feel around your body. For example, when people start diets at a point in their cycle where your body just can't sustain that, because it's just
Yeah.
going through a major thing and needs energy, to actually working out your training and just being a bit kinder to yourself around that stuff.
Yeah, I definitely need to download something like that because
I
I
would,
never keep
yeah.
track. Yeah, I never keep track, and that's
Mm,
slightly problematic. And then I'm like, oh right, whoops, I didn't realize it was this time, and then just completely mess up during that time, and I'll do more activity instead of less and things like that. So I definitely need to download something like that. And
mm.
not only periods though, but you also mentioned the fact that middle age, older woman, and obviously the menopause, huge issues and huge changes that women have to go through, and non-binary people, of course. And I was just wondering, how do we change how society views these aspects of a person's life?
I mean, unfortunately, like sexism, it's something that it's in everything. I mean, it's literally, it is everything. It's the entire structure that we're surrounded by, from the type of language that we use to almost everything we see on mainstream TV, films, and so on. um, so it's one of those things where, number one, we can make a conscious effort
Mm,
to look at our language, and to notice the times when we're either infantilizing older people, or it's like things like, oh, I'm being such a granny, like when you're sort of referring to something negative, or you can't quite grasp a certain aspect of technology or whatever. And I think it is important to be mindful of that kind of vocabulary.
mm,
The other thing I would say around that is also, definitely about broadening your own circle, and just the understand, whether that's having friends who are older, whether that is following accounts. I mean, older people TikTok is like the best thing. It's such an immersive experience to understand that what you think happens in every decade is just not what you've been brought up to believe, and that there are a thousand different ways of living and having different lifestyles and being capable of different things, and so on.
yeah.
And that, I think, that role models that really well. I think it's also about confronting your fears. Like, what are your fears about getting older? And if
Mm,
the fundamental fear, which is something that I had to unravel, is the fear that I just won't be able to do as much as I used
mm,
to, well, so what? Because there are different things you're going to be able to do. There are things that I could do in my 20s that I can't do now. There are things that I couldn't do in my 20s that
mm,
I can do now.
yeah.
I am way stronger than I ever was, 2 decades ago. So things change, and that doesn't mean that they always change for the worst. Um, and so I think that removing our fear around that is really important. But also, fundamentally, I will pull people up on it in conversation. If I
Mm,
feel that they are being massively ageist about something,
yeah.
I will kind of, I have to say something about it, because it's just not something I feel really helps them. And I don't think it makes me feel particularly great about, being older. But it is hard, because it's, we're sort of conditioned to be scared of getting older.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because, I used to go walking every Thursday with an older people group because I couldn't walk very well for a long time. And so, it was just fantastic, being able to gel with a different generation and have such amazing conversations every week. It was just so lovely. And also my own partner's father, he's 70 years old, and the fittest 70-year-old you'll ever meet, like super flexible, sits there doing the splits, he's just like really, really fit, still working every day. And I was just like, yeah, I think we just take it for granted. We just don't really understand still, because we don't see it enough, which is just like, it's really sad, actually. And so I was just wondering, what do you think is the most important lesson you teach about women's strength?
I would say the most important lesson is that I wouldn't count yourself out of doing anything just because of your age. When let's say, I'll give you a powerlifting competition as an example. When you go to a competition, you have lots of different weight categories, and you also have a lot of different age categories. And going along to something like that, and actually this is also true, for example, if you go to athletic events and they have a masters category, and masters is the level at which they describe being above a certain age, and that can depend. Let's say in athletics, that can be above 35. In powerlifting, it's above the age of 40. And what happens is that you see women who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who are competing. Like, they are putting on a singlet, same as you. They're getting up onto that platform and they are lifting quite heavy weights. And a few months ago, I saw a competition that my teammates were doing. I saw a 72-year-old woman called Sandra do a 100-kilogram deadlift, which was incredible. And I think that the idea, when I sort of said this to my mum, I think my mum's facial expression was like, because this woman is 2 years older than my mother, was just that I don't think she could almost believe it. But I just said, I'm not suggesting that. I said this to my mum. Said, I'm not suggesting that you take up powerlifting. I'm just saying that the things that you think you can't do, or that you feel aren't open to you, a lot of that is a mindset thing. If you have physical ailments that are going on, which she does have a couple of things, but we can work around that. It doesn't sort of preclude us from trying different things. If you go to an athletics masters event, you will see people with all kinds of stuff going on, but they kind of will work around it and adapt to it, and will do the thing that they really love doing. And I would say the older that you get, that sense of community and being surrounded by people that don't infantilize you, that share the same interests as you, that don't sort of say, oh no, you sure you should be doing that at your age, is really, really important. Because what really is a good reason for you to not do something just because of your age? I can't think of anything. It's a different thing if there's literally something physically preventing you from doing it, but I wouldn't underestimate the weight and the restrictiveness of that mental mindset that you can't do something just because you're a particular age.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Poorna, I just want to say huge, 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 huge thank you for speaking with me for a good chunk of time. And so I really apologize for the millions of questions I literally had for you, but thank you so much for responding to them so diligently as well. And because there's such an important topic that still needs to really, really spread, I think. So fingers crossed. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.